So we all know the Crusades as armed pilgrimages to the Holy Land by Christians determined to recover Jerusalem from Muslim rule, right? Wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, I present the Fourth Crusade. Okay, so here's the setup. We have the Great Byzantine Empire. Great? Well, not so much. Following the Third Crusade, Constantinople has been facing growing pressure from the Latins in the west and the Muslims in the east. Meet Isaac II, great military general, great ruler of the empire. Also blind, also in jail. While he was off in war, his brother, Alexius III, proclaimed himself emperor and deposed Isaac, sending him to prison. However, Isaac had a son, also named Alexius. This will be a common theme, so bear with me. Alexius IV. Well, he escapes from prison and takes refuge in the west under Pope Innocent III, who, by the way, has recently called out the French for a crusade. But enough about names. Let's talk Venice. Ah, Venice, the city on water. Well, not really. It's more of a city on a bunch of small mud islands connected by wood, but that lacks the charm, does it? Venice is an Italian republic led by a doge. Currently an old, super blind, like very blind, can't see his own hands blind, man by the name of Enrico Dondolo. This guy's in his 80s. You see, Venice lives and breathes commerce, keeping trade networks in the west, east, with Christians and Muslims alike. Venice is all about trade. Recently, the Byzantines had been limiting Venetian trade within their empire. This is a big no-no for the Venetians, who rely on free trade. The Byzantines had also been giving trade benefits to Genoa and Pisa, Venice's arch-rivals. Let's just say this leads to some drama, aka the Fourth Crusade. Okay, so we begin with Pope Innocent III calling for a crusade. The plan? Sail to Egypt, the Achilles heel of Muslims if you will. They had just suffered through famine and disease and were vulnerable. Then, from Egypt, march into Jerusalem and reclaim the Holy Land. But where would one get enough ships to carry the Crusaders? The answer was Venice. So, in 1201, 6 Frankish knights arrive in Venice. They ask Enrico for enough ships to carry 4,500 knights with their horses, 9,000 squires, 20,000 foot soldiers, food for 9 months, and in addition, Venice is to provide 50 galleys of her own troops in exchange for half the conquered territories. All of that in a 1-year period. Total cost, 84,000 to 85,000 silver marks. Fast forward a year later, Boniface of Montferrat, the leader of the Crusades, shows up with only 1/3 of the promised Crusaders. Venice, however, has exceeded expectation and fulfilled their part of the contract entirely. This made for a slightly awkward situation. The Crusaders paid what they could, but were 34,000 marks short, and Enrico would not let them leave until every last penny was paid. Now, let's go back 20 years. Zara, a Venetian city, had rebelled and joined the Hungarian Empire. This, of course, angered the Venetians, who had key trade ports there. So, Enrico has an idea and says to the Franks, "How about we sail to Zara, you help us retake it, and we will pardon your debt." The Franks agree, and in 1202, they sailed to Zara, sacked the city, and set it on fire. When Pope Innocent III finds out about this, he isn't too happy, because the Hungarians had been Christians. So, he excommunicates the expedition, aka says, "You're not Christians, burn in hell." Oh yeah, remember Alexius, the son of Isaac, who ran away? Well, he sends a letter to Boniface asking for assistance in freeing his father and crowning them emperors in the Byzantine Empire. In return, he offers to submit the Church of Constantinople to the Western Roman Catholic Church, as well as repay the Franks' debt to the Venetians. Venice liked the idea of wrecking the Byzantines. Remember, it was all about trade profits, and Venice wanted its eastern markets. Also, Enrico had spread the rumor that he'd been blinded by the Byzantine emperor, which angered the Venetians even more. And so, in 1203, the massive fleet arrives in Constantinople. Oh, by the way, Enrico Dondolo was with them for the entire expedition. In a full suit of armor, he took the first step onto land and set down the Venetian banner. Did I mention he's in his 80s? Anyways, the Franks seize the city walls and their 25 towers, while the Venetians break the chain and attack the harbor. Then they take the city and set it on fire, burning 125 acres. Alexius III, the current Byzantine emperor, immediately flees the city. And just as promised, Isaac is crowned, and along with him, his son Alexius IV is crowned co-emperor. Victory! Right? Wrong. You see, Alexius IV was slowly regretting his previous promise to the Franks. But the fleet would not leave. So to delay his promise, he, and I'm not kidding you, bribed them to stay for a year and work as security in the city. This created a deception. Yes, Alexius IV owed money and the church to the Franks, who owed serious money to the Venetians, and all were impatient. Nonetheless, the Franks and the Venetians remained encamped by the Galata Tower. 1 year later, there was a riot in one of the churches between some Frankish knights and priests. So the angered Franks took the church and set it on fire, which then spread to the city and set it on fire. Tensions rose between Alexius IV and the Latins, and between the citizens of Constantinople, who disliked how Alexius favored the foreigners. A group of conspirators decided Alexius needed to go, and so a guy by the name of, can you guess it, Alexius, nicknamed Murzuphilus for his unibrow, tricked Alexius IV into believing his guards were revolting. As Alexius walked out to check, Murzuphilus and company tied him up and locked him away. Isaac II had died shortly after, so Murzuphilus became emperor, though not for long. By this time, the Venetians were already leading a full-on attack on the city. It started when 6 impatient, though you can't blame them, Venetian and Frankish delegates barged into Alexius's palace, demanding their payment. They were refused, and voila, war. This siege was harder than the first, because the city walls and harbor had been rebuilt higher and stronger. At first, when the Venetians failed to break in, they tied their galleys in pairs to double the force of impact. It worked. The Venetians were very skilled at naval combat. So skilled on ships were the Venetians that when the Byzantines at one point tried to destroy the fleet with Greek fire, the Venetians managed to escape with barely any damage. Meanwhile, the Franks, who were beasts at warfare on land, broke open the city gates. By the time Boniface stepped into the city, Murzuphilus had fled, and most of the Byzantine army along with him. 3 days of vandalism, theft, pillaging, and destruction followed. Churches were stripped of their gems and pearls and gold. Statues so long preserved by the Greeks were broken. Blood spilled through the streets of the city. Years of preserved literary works gone because... Oh, did I forget to mention? When they took the city, they set it on fire. For a third time. Third time's the charm, right? The Franks were to bring all plunder, which included coin, metal, furs, spices, into a common stock under leverage of the Venetians, who ended up getting 50,000 marks to repay the debt. However, not all was lost. The Venetians, who knew the value of the city's riches, did their best to preserve the quality of their loot, which they took back to Venice. This can be seen in the architectural mess that St. Mark's Basilica is, containing a mishmash of different columns, mosaics, and art. Displayed in the basilica to this day, the 4 bronze horses of Constantinople's Hippodrome are famous for being stolen by the Venetians. As for the rest of the story, eventually the Venetians and Franks will elect a new emperor and divide up the empire, though the siege doesn't last for long. New forces begin to approach Constantinople and create new problems. The Fourth Crusade ended in an ironic slaughter of Christians by people of the same faith, so it's probably incorrect to even call it a crusade. The Venetians and Enrico became the real winner, and the Byzantines will never fully recover after the event that destroyed their city.